Hi.
Hi everyone, and welcome to our author chat with Jan Edwards. Jan, do you want to just introduce yourself to everybody and tell us about what you write before I go into our questions?
I'm Jan Edwards. I write crime. Currently just got Listed Dead out and the other two books. I also write folk horror. That's the latest one, she says. Written a lot of horror short stories over the years. A lot of Sherlock Holmes stories in various anthologies. So that's my sphere of fiction that I write, at least. Hopefully somebody will have read some of them.
Well, I've read a couple of them in preparation for the chat. I want to start off with Bunch because she's our main series, isn't she? And Winterdown, which is the one I'm curious as to what led you to write them set during World War II.
It is a period of history that I find quite fascinating. Growing up on Sussex Weald and the Downs, there's still a lot of, or at least where they were in the 50s and 60s, a lot of pillboxes, a lot of dugouts, a lot of remnants of that era still in the field. You go into a field and there'll be a random pillbox stuck in the middle of a field. It's not unusual down there. The farm I grew up on, there was an embankment, a dugout on the bank of the River Arun, which we didn't know was there until there was a flood after the... Here.
Hello, you're back.
I am. I don't know what one. You do realise this is the curse of Edwards. Anything techno, that's it. You never works with me online. Oh, it's warm in here.
I know. We've got you now. So do you want to retell us your answer to why you chose the World War II setting?
Well, it's a mix of really liking Golden Age crime and having an awful lot of World War II artifacts in the landscape growing up in the pillboxes, dugouts, all that kind of stuff. Old airfields. I mean, the Sussex landscape is littered with it. Less so now, I think, but certainly in the 50s and 60s. It's just something I grew up with, and it just seemed to fit somehow. I don't know, strolled into it, as one does.
I would imagine, though, that there is some challenges to writing things set in that era. There must be a lot of research that you have to do.
A lot of research, yes. You need to read around the subject an awful lot. One of the things I was asked recently was why people weren't mentioning gas masks. And I actually had read in a number of places that by Easter of 1940, almost nobody, less than 20% of the population, were actually carrying their gas masks. It was never law that you had to have them, and people actually didn't carry them. So although people from this point of view, assume that they'd be there, they're not. Perhaps I should include them because people expect them to be there, but then it's not historically accurate. I don't know. It's a fine line, isn't it, between being accurate and meeting expectations.
Is it the same like when you're writing the language, because people talked quite differently then? So do you have to think about the way that sort of Bunch and people would talk?
Yes. I mean, I do look up slang terms of the era to make sure that I'm getting some of the wordage, and also a slightly more formal speech pattern, which you still heard in the 50s. So perhaps I'm lucky in that I still heard those speech patterns to an extent when I was growing up. But yes, you have to watch how people are speaking, what they call things, terminology, just to get the flavour of it. Yeah.
So while you were gone, I was doing my very best to advertise your books. And I told everybody that you'd won the Arnold Prize.
With that one, yes. Winterdowns. That was fun. I never expected to win that one, but there you go. Arnold Bennett. Do people know who Arnold Bennett is? If you live in the Midlands, but Stoke particularly, he's a famous author, but perhaps not as well known now as he was. People may have done Anna the Five Towns at school, I would imagine.
Do you know, I went to school in Stoke-on-Trent, and I have no idea. I never read him at school.
Really? That does surprise me, because the Stokies generally are quite vociferous about Arnold Bennett. I think they don't have many literary claimants in the city, but he's one of them. Yeah, so, or the most famous, probably.
Oh, he is. I knew who he was, but I've never had to read his books.
Yeah, I mean, one of the Bloomsbury set, of course, with Virginia Woolf and et al. So famous in his day. One that he was a bestseller. It was a huge author in his day. But like all of these things, they pass on, and people don't let. Oh,
we got a fantastic question on the stream that I can't wait to ask you. Sorry, it just popped up and it's great. It says, do you ever feel you need to get into dress up when you write, so you get a feel for the characters that you're writing about? Do you go vintage, full 40s style?
Not dressing. I do occasionally put on because it gives you the feel of. Not a fan of crooners, but swing, yes. I grew up with that anyway, because my dad loved swing music. His mother taking the arm off of his record player because he dared to play swing music on a Sunday, which was not.
Oh, wow.
She was a ferocious woman.
So you're more of the swing music and things, more the music of the era than the clothing of the era to get you into the...
Are we done? Or have I frozen again?
No, I can hear you again. You still there? Oh, she's frozen again, but she was saying that...
Yes. I think... all right, good. Glad about that. I'm a bit closer. Yeah, I'm here. Hello.
I've got you. There's another question on the stream that says you've written in multiple genres. Are there any that you would like to write in that you haven't already?
Not really. I mean, I've done mainstream writing. I've done crime. Never really wanted to write for children's. I think it's that's an art form, and if you don't read a lot of it, then I don't think you can quite get the feel of it. So no, I think I've written in most of the genres that I feel I'm interested in writing in, or feel I could do, would probably be a better way of putting it.
So
that makes sense.
It makes a lot of sense. I recently read A Small Step for Yolanda, which you described as folk horror, but it's based on a real case.
Yes, Yolanda, a small thing for Yolanda. Yes, it was written originally for an anthology of French folk horror, and it is based on a real case that happened in the 1930s of kind of a locked room, but it was a locked railway carriage mystery. The records of that case have been locked and will remain locked for another 30 years, I think. The French authorities decided that the records of that case were not for public consumption, so we've never really known what happened to the woman concerned, Letitia Thoreau. But there you go. I quite like to use sort of that sort of thing in fiction. It spurs ideas. But it's folk horror, yes.
So I think you were saying that you like to use sort of real cases in your fiction. Have you done that with Bunch as well? Use like a real sort of case from the time? Use real sort of case.
Not real cases as such, but you get themes that were happening at the time. For instance, in her defense, there was a great deal of around the time that they rounded up alien, German, Austrian, Italian eventually. A lot of them were shipped off to the Isle of Man, and there was a huge groundswell of animosity toward anybody who didn't sound English. So that was part of that theme, that there was then when it was actually happening, and you kind of thought that's quite eerie because it was echoing what was going on at the time. That was quite so sometimes it's history repeats itself. But yes, I do take themes that were in the reading around the history, because I do a lot of reading around the period of what was happening in society at that time.
Did you, because your main character in that series is of a sort of a higher social status, did you choose to make her of that status on purpose?
I think it gave her a lot more freedom to move around. People who were not in that strata were more fixed in what they were able to do. They couldn't travel, they couldn't get around in quite the same way. She was actually based upon where my father worked as a shepherd in the late 50s and early 60s. She was based on the daughter of the household at that time. So she was actually based on somebody that I'd known as a child. I should have known up to that, should I? So she was based on somebody that I really brought to mind when I was writing.
Do you ever base any of your other characters on real people or people that you know?
Somebody in mind. I mean, it does help if you've actually got somebody in your head when you're writing a particular character. I don't think I'd own up to any of my murderers being somebody that was real. You may not like it, being labelled as being a murderer, but when you're writing, I do anyway. It helps.
So what I really liked about you when I started reading about you is that you've got all these lovely books set in the 40s and things like that. They're quite cozy, but you've also written for Doctor Who. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, I was writing, it was a direct-to-video film, White Witch of Devil's End, which was based upon a John Pertwee story, which was the Demons of Devil's End. And it was a series, there were 6 writers, it was a series of 6 talking head stories that were done on film by the actress Damaris Hayden, who is still with us, but getting on a bit. And she won an award actually recently for a best narrator for a story on film, the film award. So that's a lot of fun. I enjoyed doing that with Dr. Who stuff. Official Doctor. I mean, it is a licensed Doctor Who.
Samantha has asked on the stream, what have been your most memorable moments as an author so far?
Gosh, that's always a hard one. I mean, it's always fun to do. I've done panels at events, and that's always fun to do. Launches and things like that. It's always different. Most memorable event as an author. Yeah, panels, I guess. Being at events, being on doing readings, they're always fun. Interacting with the audience, I think, it's when you interact with readers. That's always the best thing, I think.
What's been the changes for you during lockdown then? Because I know you brought out a book in lockdown because you've got one that's come out this week. Has it been any different to sort of when you've done that before?
Yes, that's different. Having to do it online is harder work, I think, because you can't reach the audience in quite the same way. But you do what you can. Now it's going to be difficult. So I figured I might as well go with it. And I know some people delayed them until the autumn, but I don't think it's going to get any better from that point of view. Yeah.
How would you normally celebrate a launch? Oops, we've lost Jan again. TG, well, we tried to sort out unfreezing Jan. I know you said you missed her answer to a question earlier. She said rather than dressing up in character in the vintage clothes, she likes to listen to sort of swing and other music from the era.
Go again.
Yep, you're back again. So I asked you how you would normally celebrate your book launches.
Usually at events. I mean, I've done, because with the horror stuff, you have things like FantasyCon, or local, hire a room in a library or a pub or something and do it, invite everybody in. Usually how they get launched. I'm usually done an online as well, an online event as well. So kind of a mix of both, really.
Jason Kelly, one of our admins, asked, how did you get into writing?
I've always done it. Always, from a child, writing. Not really done much published until the late 90s, mid to late 90s, but I've always written. Something I've always wanted to do.
And I think there's a question going from there, because she said about when you published. There's a 3-part question on here from someone. It just says Facebook user that says, when did you write your first short story, your first novella, and your first novel?
Write or published? Because there's a big difference. First published short story was... Sorry?
I said, let's tell them that.
The first published short story would have been about 1990 or 91. I've written a lot of stuff before that, but the first one in print was then. Novella, I don't write that much at novella length, probably late 90s. And the first novel would have been this one, which is Sussex. No, pick up the right one. She can't find it. Sussex Tales, which I haven't got in front of me, which would have been 1999, I think, or 2000. Off about that. So,
do you have? Yeah, I am. Do you have an end in sight for the series with Bunch?
Not at the moment. I'm working my way through the war years. I'm kind of doing them chronologically. Right. I decided the best thing to do is just shut down and start again. If in doubt, reboot.
That's always a good plan. So an end in sight for Bunch. Would you go into the 50s with it?
Perhaps. I have thought about sending her into like private sleuthing post-war. I don't know yet. I haven't really got that far because I mean, the next book, which is In Cases of Murder, is 1941. So I've still got a few years to go before I get having to worry about whether I continue after the end of the war or not. I haven't decided yet.
She has a bit of she has quite a love-hate relationship with the police inspector in her books. How does that develop? Without giving too much away, does that continue to develop across the series?
Again, I haven't made up my mind whether they're going to be a thing or not. They do have this, as you say, love-hate thing. She likes him, but he resents her because he doesn't want her interfering. He doesn't want a damn civilian interfering in police work. And that's where they're coming from. I think I quite like that dynamic. Whether the dynamic would change if they became a couple, I think sometimes you can lose something. I don't know. I haven't made up my mind yet. I haven't decided. That's in
when you write, do you plot out in advance or do you make it up as you go?
I have a rough idea of where I'm going. I have a beginning, I have an end. I don't plot too much in detail about what happens in between because I quite like to have some kind of freedom as which avenues I go down with a story. I've always been a seat of the pants writer. I just kind of, but you can't do that so much with a series because you've got your characters, you've got their setting, and also when you're doing a whodunit, you've also got to see clues so that the reader's got a chance of reaching the end and going, yes, I knew that. I think people do like when they're reading that kind of story. They like to be with you in the investigation and not playing catch up. So you've got to plan to some extent, but I don't plan in huge detail. I know some people do, but my brain doesn't work like that. It's too messy.
So I know you're not too keen on the cozy crime description, and you say that your novel's a more golden age. What's the kind of characteristics of a golden age novel?
Golden age is usually often sleuths, private sleuths rather than detectives. I mean, there were police detectives in that age, but an awful lot of them, sort of Lord Peter Wimsey's and that sort of thing, were private sleuths rather than detectives, which all comes down from Sherlock Holmes, of course. I like the era because I think without the technology, I think you've got to do an awful lot of spade work. It's like more heavy lifting with the detection itself. And I quite like that aspect of it. I don't know. I quite like the golden age feel to it. It's kind of got something about it that's, I wouldn't say more glamorous, but it is more fun somehow. Just a personal preference.
Are there any bits of your research that you've done that have surprised you?
Apart from gas masks, you mean? You turn up all kinds of things. I came across one thing that actually made me smile. In the 39-40, the British government bought up the entire stock of the world's tea in order to keep the troops going on tea. They brought out every bit of, apart from China, obviously, they brought up all the tea in the world. Tons and tons, hundreds of thousands of tons of tea. Yeah, no, it's weird. Little fact you turn up in the lines of research. So yes,
must be really depressing if you're a soldier.
Yeah. So they had to have their cup of tea. The British Army will not move without tea. It was good for morale, apparently. The government thought it would be bad for morale if nobody could get tea. Could do that. So anything else, but not tea.
There's another couple of questions on the stream. Someone has asked, which of your novels has been the hardest to write?
That's very tricky, actually, because they've all got their problems. You hit a hiatus sometimes with every book, or I do. You kind of get halfway through and think, where do I go now? And that's because I don't plan anything. That's my fault. Which is the hardest to write? I don't know. In some ways, it's easier to write because I know Bunch. I know what she's going to say. I know what she thinks. I know I know the people and the places. But that is also a restriction because you can't rush off on flights of fancy because you've got to stick within the world that you've made. So it's a trade-off as to what's harder, whether Winterdown was harder or Listed Dead. They both have their upsides and downsides.
And there's another question that is really interesting that says, have you ever written anything with Peter, brackets, husband?
No. Oh, apart from one poem. We did a poem which was published some years ago about writing fantasy fiction. That's the only thing we've actually written. We've edited anthologies together. The Alchemy Press Book of Horrors 1 and Alchemy Press Book of Horrors 2, because we run the Alchemy Press between us. So we've edited together, but not written together very much.
Does he read your books?
Oh yes, he edits them. He has no choice.
Do you read all of your reviews when you get them?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, I think it's very hard not to. I think most writers do read the reviews. Some claim not to, but I'm sure they do secretly. It'd be very strange not to, I think.
I'm going to ask you one of my favourite questions. Would you ever make a graphic novel of one of your books?
Do a graphic novel of one of my books, probably. I mean, I'm not a huge reader of graphic novels. Peter reads a lot of graphic novels. Something I've never got into, really. Possibly because I'm dyslexic. So when I'm looking at things, I'm thinking, where do I go next? Because the text doesn't follow. And if you're dyslexic, that's actually quite hard to kind of follow the text when you can't see where the next bit is. So I struggle a little with that. So,
how does that affect your writing?
Probably makes me a little slower. The ideas are there. Getting it onto paper is a little slower for me because, yeah, just constructing generally the sentence by sentence, I have to work a little bit harder perhaps. But you know, as long as your ideas are there, that's you work hard at it.
Samantha says, what are you working on at the moment?
The next one is Cases of Murder, which is the next Bunch book. I'm also writing on some Sherlock Holmes short stories for an anthology. And also I have a book I'm hoping to put out. Something I wrote a little while ago, which is an urban urban fantasy folk horror trilogy that's been on the back burner for a while. So that might come out in the next year. It's me and technology. You know this is the curse of Edwards, don't you? Me and technology.
We were just talking about this while you were away. I have a theory that you're a wizard.
Yes, I mean, well, I am a witch. I am a practicing. There you go. But no, I do. I kill technology. I'm renowned for it. I'm on my third battery. I'm on my third laptop battery because I killed them.
Oh dear. In the time we've got left, tell us a little bit about your urban fantasy series, because it sounds fantastic and I would need to buy it.
The urban fantasy is she's kind of a sleuth as well. She's somebody who's been ousted by her own people and has been set down in the south of England to be the lawkeeper for the the Fae community. So yes, that's where that one's coming from. It's quite fun. A lot of involves the last dragon in England, which is quite fun. Have you heard about the last dragon in England?
No, I haven't.
It's purported to be St Leonard's Forest near Horsham. There was a report of the last dragon in England was slain in St Leonard's Forest in, I think it was 1440 something. I mean, it's quite, quite well known. If you go to St Leonard's, you look it up. St Leonard's in Horsham, last dragon. So I decided to use the last dragon in a book. Why not? He's not dead. He's just invisible. Fun. So
I know your books are all based in Sussex, but you live in Stoke-on-Trent. Yeah. Would you ever write anything set in Stoke?
No, really. I mean, I haven't researched the local folklore enough to really speak of it with any assurance. I know Sussex. I know it's folklore. I know it's little foibles. So is he? I mean, we write the old adage of "write what you know" is so very true. It's much easier to write about something that you're familiar with. I've lived up this area, oh gosh, 10 years now. So I suppose I'm getting to know Stoke more now. I've only actually been in Stoke 3 years. I was out in the Staffordshire Moorlands before that. The wilds of the Moorlands. Strange place.
You're matching my time. I lived in Stoke-on-Trent for 10 years.
Yes. Can't see us moving anytime soon. So you get to a time of life where you think, nah, I don't want to move again. Unless of course I sell the film rights to Bunch, and then yeah, maybe.
So we don't have a lot of time left. We've
technology.
I know.
Any more question?
We don't have any more questions on the stream, so would you like to give us a reminder of all the amazing things that you write, and maybe tell us, because I know you do sell signed copies of them, don't you?
I do. You can get signed copies of Listed Dead or No Defense or Winterdowns, or indeed Small Thing for Yolanda. If you go to my website, you can message me, and PayPal is a wonderful thing. You can buy them from me direct. You can get signed copies. Yes, no problem. Should have come to the launch. I was doing giveaways. I got one for free.
And hopefully, if we haven't scared you off after tonight, we will see you back again at the Cozy Crime panel at our August bank holiday.
I can certainly hope to be there, providing my internet doesn't crack up on me again. And it is, you know, with me. Sorry about that. I did warn you.
You did warn us. You did warn us about your curse of technology. But it's been a genuine pleasure to talk to you, even with all the problems.
Likewise. Always fun.
And thanks for joining us.
We'll see you again. And yes, thank you very much. Pleasure to be here.